You wake up, same alarm, same commute, same desk, same thoughts day after day, week after week, until one day you realize you can't remember the last time you felt truly alive. You're not sad, you're not exactly happy either, you're just existing, going through the motions, and somewhere deep inside a quiet voice asks, is this it? Is this all there is? If you've ever felt this way, this video is for you. Because today, we're going to talk about something millions of people experience but few openly discuss. We're going to talk about breaking free. Psychologists call it the rut. Not depression in the clinical sense, though it can lead there. It's something more subtle, more insidious. It's emotional flatness. The feeling that life has become a monotonous loop and you're trapped inside it. You know the symptoms: Sunday evening dread, Monday morning numbness, the sense that weeks blur together into an indistinguishable mass. You accomplish things, check boxes, meet deadlines, but nothing excites you anymore, nothing feels meaningful. And here's what you need to know: you're not alone. Studies show that over 60% of working adults report feeling stuck in their routines. Over 40% say they feel emotionally numb or disconnected from their lives. This isn't a personal failure. This is a widespread human experience, and it has a scientific explanation. Your brain has a feature that's supposed to keep you safe. It's called habituation. When you experience something new, your brain pays attention. It releases dopamine, the motivation chemical. It notices every detail. But when you experience the same thing repeatedly, your brain stops noticing. It saves energy by tuning out familiar stimuli. This is why your first day at a new job feels electric with possibility, but a year later, you barely register walking through the same door. This is why a new relationship feels thrilling, but familiarity can breed indifference. Your brain literally adapts to reduce its response to repeated experiences. In prehistoric times, this was useful. Once you learned a path was safe, you didn't need to stay alert every time you walked it. But in modern life, this same mechanism becomes a trap. Because when everything in your life becomes routine, everything becomes background noise. You stop feeling, you stop noticing, you become stuck. And here's the cruelest paradox of all. The reason you stay stuck isn't because change is impossible. It's because your brain has convinced you that staying where you are is safer than venturing into the unknown. Your comfort zone isn't comfortable anymore, but fear keeps you there anyway. Let's talk about why nothing excites you anymore. Inside your brain, there's a reward system powered by dopamine. When you encounter something new or achieve something meaningful, dopamine floods specific pathways in your brain. This creates the sensation we call motivation, excitement, pleasure. But here's the thing about dopamine. It's released not just when you get a reward, but when you anticipate a reward. It's prediction-based. When you start a new project and imagine success, dopamine flows. When you pursue a new goal and make progress, dopamine flows. But when you do the same things day after day and you already know exactly what will happen, your brain stops releasing dopamine. There's no prediction, no surprise, no novelty. This is why you can feel exhausted and unmotivated, even though nothing is technically wrong. Your dopamine system isn't malfunctioning. It's doing exactly what it evolved to do. It's conserving energy by ignoring predictable stimuli. The problem is, predictable has become unbearable. Without sufficient dopamine signaling, your prefrontal cortex, the planning and motivation center of your brain, becomes underactive. Making decisions feels harder. Starting tasks feels impossible. You experience what neuroscientists call anhedonia, the inability to feel pleasure. And the longer you stay in the rut, the deeper it gets. So if staying stuck feels terrible, why don't we just change? Because there's another part of your brain at work, the amygdala. This almond-shaped structure is your threat detection system, and it has one primary job: keep you alive by avoiding danger. Here's the problem: your amygdala doesn't distinguish between physical danger and uncertainty. When you think about making a big change, like switching careers, moving cities, or ending a stagnant relationship, your amygdala interprets that uncertainty as threat. It triggers the same stress response you'd get if you encountered a predator: heart racing, palms sweating, mind catastrophizing. This is called loss aversion, and Nobel Prize winners Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky proved something fascinating. Human beings feel losses approximately twice as intensely as equivalent gains. Think about that. The pain of potentially losing what you have feels twice as powerful as the pleasure of gaining something better. Your brain screams, "What if you make things worse?" much louder than it whispers, "What if you make things better?" This is why people stay in jobs they hate, relationships that died years ago, cities where they have no real connections. Not because change is impossible, but because loss aversion creates a psychological prison stronger than any physical barrier. And then there's the voice, you know, the one, the inner critic that tells you you're not good enough, not smart enough, not capable of change, that everyone else has it figured out but you're faking it. This voice isn't you, It's an internalized echo of criticism you received in the past, from parents who set impossible standards, teachers who highlighted failures more than successes, peers who excluded or judged you. Over time, you learned to criticize yourself before others could, a defense mechanism that became a prison guard. Psychologists call this imposter syndrome when it manifests in achievement contexts. And here's a statistic that might surprise you. 70% of people experience imposter syndrome at some point in their lives. 70%. Some of the most accomplished, talented, successful people in the world feel like frauds. This isn't rare. This isn't you being broken. This is the human condition. But here's what makes the inner critic so destructive. It creates a self-fulfilling prophecy. When you believe you'll fail, you don't try as hard. When you don't try as hard, you get worse results. When you get worse results, the inner critic says, "See, I told you so," and the cycle continues. So how do we break free? Let's start with the most counterintuitive, most powerful technique in the entire arsenal of psychological interventions. It's called behavioral activation, and it's considered the gold standard treatment for depression. Here's the core principle, and I need you to really hear this. Action comes before motivation, not after. You've been waiting to feel motivated before you take action, but that's backwards. Motivation is a result of action, not a prerequisite for it. You don't wait until you feel like going to the gym. You go to the gym and then during or after motivation appears. You don't wait until you feel excited about a project. You start the project and engagement follows. This is what behavioral activation means. You schedule activities, especially pleasant ones, even when you don't feel like it. Especially when you don't feel like it. You take tiny actions, and your mood follows your behavior. There's a technique called the 2-minute rule. Instead of planning to exercise for an hour, commit to 2 minutes. Just put on your workout clothes. Once you're dressed, the next step feels easier. Instead of writing a novel, write for 2 minutes. Once you start, momentum builds. The hardest part of any action is starting, so make starting absurdly easy. Here's what happens in your brain. When you take action, even small action, you create what's called a reward prediction error. Your dopamine system expected nothing to happen, but something did happen. You moved, you changed your environment, and dopamine responds to that unpredictability. It starts flowing again, and with dopamine comes motivation. With motivation comes more action, and the upward spiral begins. The second technique is dishabituation. Remember how habituation made everything feel flat? Well, we can reverse it by injecting novelty into your life. And I'm not talking about quitting your job and moving to Bali, although you could. I'm talking about small daily novelty. Take a different route to work, order something new from the menu, start a conversation with someone you don't know, rearrange your furniture, wear something you normally wouldn't. Why does this work? Because novelty forces your brain to pay attention. It disrupts the automatic, unconscious processing that keeps you numb. It triggers dopamine release. It wakes you up. There's a therapy technique called opposite action. When depression tells you to stay in bed, you get up. When anxiety tells you to avoid, you approach. When routine tells you to repeat, you innovate. You do the opposite of what the rut demands. Another powerful strategy is environment design. Your environment shapes your behavior more than your willpower does. If your home office is cluttered and depressing, working feels draining. If your bedroom is filled with screens, sleep suffers. Change your environment and you change your experience. Paint a wall, add plants, create a space that doesn't feel like the cage you've been living in. And here's the social component: reach out. When you're stuck, your instinct is to isolate. But connection is one of the most powerful dishabituation tools available. Call a friend you haven't spoken to in months. Join a class. Volunteer. Human connection creates novelty, meaning, and dopamine. It reminds you that you exist beyond your routine. Now let's deal with that voice, the inner critic, the one telling you that you can't change, that you're not enough, that you'll fail. Cognitive behavioral therapy has a powerful technique called cognitive restructuring. You learn to identify cognitive distortions, the thinking errors that keep you stuck, and challenge them with evidence. For example, the inner critic says, "You always fail." That's an example of all or nothing thinking. Is it really true that you always fail? Or have you succeeded at some things and failed at others, like every human being? The critic says everyone else has it together. That's mind reading and comparison. You're comparing your internal experience to everyone else's external presentation. You have no idea what they're really experiencing. Here's a question that stops the inner critic in its tracks. Would you say this to a friend? If a friend came to you feeling stuck and scared, would you tell them they're worthless and incapable? Of course not. You'd be compassionate. You'd remind them of their strengths. You'd encourage them to try. So why are you treating yourself worse than you'd treat anyone else? Self-compassion isn't self-indulgence. It's recognizing that you're human, that struggling is part of the human experience, that you deserve the same kindness you'd offer others. Dr. Kristin Neff's research shows that self-compassion is more strongly linked to psychological well-being than self-esteem, because self-esteem depends on performance. Self-compassion exists regardless of performance. Start gathering evidence of your capabilities. Write down 3 things you accomplished today, no matter how small. Did laundry? That counts. Showed up to work? That counts. Each piece of evidence weakens the inner critic's hold. You're not arguing with it, you're systematically dismantling it with facts. All right, let's tackle the fear. The amygdala, the loss aversion, the catastrophic thinking that keeps you from making changes you know you need to make. Exposure therapy has a technique called the anxiety hierarchy. You write down everything you're afraid of related to a change you want to make. Then you rank them from 1 to 10. 1 is mildly uncomfortable, 10 is terrifying. Here's the key: you don't start with 10, you start with 1. You expose yourself to the least scary version of the fear, and you stay there until your anxiety decreases, because it will decrease. Anxiety is a wave, it peaks and then it subsides. Every time you survive the fear, your brain learns, this isn't actually dangerous. Let's say you want to change careers but you're terrified. You don't start by quitting your job, that's a 10, you start with a 1. Maybe you read articles about the field you're interested in, then you reach out to one person on LinkedIn, then you take an online course, then you do a small freelance project. Each step proves you can handle it, each step reduces the fear. This is called stress inoculation. You're building tolerance. You're teaching your amygdala that uncertainty isn't threat. And here's a powerful reframe: the fear never completely goes away, but you get braver. The fear becomes background noise instead of a siren. And let's talk about those statistics I mentioned earlier. 90% of people who change careers report being happier afterward. 90%. The thing you're terrified of doing. Most people who do it are glad they did. Your brain is lying to you about the risks. The real risk is staying stuck forever. Here's something that sounds too simple to work, but the science is overwhelming. Move your body. Exercise is as effective as antidepressant medication for treating mild to moderate depression. Not kind of helpful, not a nice addition. As effective, because when you exercise, you increase blood flow to your prefrontal cortex. You boost dopamine, serotonin, and norepinephrine. You reduce inflammation, which is increasingly linked to depression. You literally change your brain chemistry. You don't need to run marathons. A 20-minute walk, especially outside in nature, measurably improves mood. Resistance training builds not just muscle but confidence. Yoga and stretching activate your parasympathetic nervous system, the rest and digest mode that counteracts chronic stress. Then there's sleep. You cannot feel good if you're sleep deprived. Sleep deprivation impairs your prefrontal cortex, the rational, planning, emotion-regulating part of your brain. It increases amygdala reactivity, making you more anxious and emotionally volatile. If you want to break free from the rut, prioritize sleep like your life depends on it, because in many ways it does. Nutrition matters too. The gut-brain axis is real. The bacteria in your gut produce neurotransmitters that affect your mood. A diet high in processed foods and sugar increases inflammation and worsens depression. A diet rich in whole foods, omega-3 fatty acids, and fiber supports brain health. You're not just feeding your body, you're feeding your mind. And finally, breathwork. When you're anxious, your breathing becomes shallow and rapid. This activates your sympathetic nervous system, your fight-or-flight response, but you can hack this system. Slow, deep breathing, especially if your exhale is longer than your inhale, activates your parasympathetic nervous system. 5 seconds in, 7 seconds out. 2 minutes of this measurably reduces anxiety. Your mind and body aren't separate, they're one system. Change your body and your mind follows. Now let's talk about what happens when you start applying these techniques. When you take action before motivation. When you inject novelty. When you challenge the inner critic and face your fears and move your body. At first, nothing dramatic happens. You take a different route to work and you're still the same person. You do 2 minutes of exercise and you're not suddenly fit. You challenge one negative thought and the inner critic still has plenty to say. But here's what you need to understand about change: it compounds. If you improve by just 1% every day for a year, you don't end up 1% better. You end up 37 times better. 37 times, because small improvements stack on top of each other. They multiply. This is called the compound effect, and it's the reason tiny habits create massive transformations. You don't need a revolution. You need consistency. You need to show up even when it's hard, even when you don't see immediate results, and trust that momentum is building beneath the surface. James Clear, author of Atomic Habits, uses the metaphor of an ice cube. If you have an ice cube in a room that's 25 degrees, nothing happens. Raise the temperature to 26 degrees, still nothing. 27, 28, still frozen. Then you hit 32 degrees and suddenly the ice melts. but it wasn't the final degree that melted it. It was all the degrees combined. Right now, you're accumulating degrees. You're building momentum. And one day, maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but one day something will shift, and you'll realize you're not stuck anymore. Track your progress visibly. Use a habit tracker. Write in a journal. Take photos, because progress is often invisible to you while you're living it. But when you look back, you'll see how far you've come, and that evidence will fuel your motivation to keep going. Let me tell you about people who are where you are now. There's a woman who spent 15 years in a corporate job that made her miserable. Every Sunday, she'd get a pit in her stomach. Every morning, she'd drag herself to work. She knew she needed to leave, but she was terrified. She had bills, responsibilities. What if she couldn't make it as a freelancer? She started small, one freelance project on the side, then another. She built a portfolio, saved money, and 2 years later she quit. Today she makes more money, works fewer hours, and describes her life as unrecognizable from before. She said the hardest part wasn't the change itself, it was deciding to start. Or the man who realized he'd been living the same year on repeat for a decade. Same friends, same bars, same conversations. He felt numb, so he did something radical. He signed up for an improv class. He hated it at first, but he kept going, and through that class he met new people, discovered a creative outlet, started dating again, changed his entire social circle, all because he chose novelty over comfort. These stories have a pattern: rock bottom, tiny action, momentum, transformation. None of them waited until they felt ready. They acted before they felt ready, and their feelings caught up. You're at the beginning of your story. You don't know yet how it ends, but every transformation starts the same way, with a single decision to stop accepting the rut as permanent. I'm going to give you a 30-day challenge, 4 weeks, 4 simple focuses. Week 1, add 1 new thing every day. Doesn't matter what: new food, new route, new song, new conversation. Train your brain to expect novelty. Week 2, start a 10-minute morning routine. Move your body for 10 minutes. Could be stretching, could be walking, could be dancing in your living room. Just move, preferably before you look at your phone. This sets your nervous system for the day. Week 3, reach out to one person. A friend you've lost touch with, a family member you've been avoiding, someone new you'd like to know. Connection pulls you out of isolation. Isolation maintains the rut. Week 4, take 1 scary step toward a change you've been avoiding. Not the whole change, just 1 step. Update your resume. Research a class, have a difficult conversation, book a therapy session. Prove to yourself that you can tolerate the fear. That's it, 4 weeks, 4 focuses. At the end of 30 days, I promise you'll feel different. Not fixed, not arrived, but different. And different is the crack in the wall. Different is where freedom begins. Here's the truth you already know but maybe needed to hear. The prison door was never locked. The chains were never real. Fear made them feel real. Habit made them feel permanent, but they're not. You have more power than you think, more capability than you believe, more potential than your inner critic will ever admit. And the life you want, the one where you feel alive again, where Monday morning doesn't fill you with dread, where you wake up excited about the day ahead, that life is available to you, not someday, today. There's a saying, the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago, the second best time is now. You can't change the past, but you can change what you do next, and what you do next determines everything. So here's my question: not tomorrow, not Monday, right now. What's the smallest step you can take toward the person you want to become? What's the tiniest action that would prove to yourself that change is possible? Do that, just that, and then do the next thing, and the next, 1 degree at a time, 1 day at a time, until you look back and realize you're not stuck anymore. You're free.